Over with Governor Beard and the Facilities Committee.
No? There we go. I'd like to call the Facilities Committee to order. Mikey, can I have a call of the roll, please?
Sure. Mr. Martin?
Here.
Harris? Here. Mr. Stavros? Mr. Temple?
Here.
Dr. Yost? Here. Mr. Colson?
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the minutes of September 14th, 2011.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you. We've got it. We're trying something a little bit different. We're trying to use the technology that's in front of us so that everybody can see what we're talking about, and it looks like it's working. So with that, I'd like to call on Chris Kinsley. Chris is there to go over the PICO outlook that we discussed at the last meeting and bring us up to date on where we are right now. So Chris, I'll leave it with you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Yes, we're trying something different. We're hopeful this will help, especially going through the detailed schedule that we sometimes have to deal with it on this committee. At the last meeting, you'll be familiar with this slide. This was the PICO estimate that we were hopeful for. We were hopeful based on the estimating conference that this line in blue would be the revenues available to the system. And the board, of course, adopted PICO LBR based on this projection, as we're required to do by statute. Unfortunately, the latest estimate indicates that this was an optimistic projection. That line in blue, as you see, basically disappears. The state will have no bonding capacity in PICO in 12-13 based on the latest estimate. We're left with that green line, which is the cash-only portion of PICO. That, in effect, means that we'll only have funding for the basic maintenance, the patch and repair type maintenance for the system. The good news is there is one more estimate to come, and hopefully the revenues will be somewhat better and we'll have some bonding capacity. I think there's a lot of attention that's been brought to this issue as a result of our board's discussions of the matter, and hopefully there'll be some solutions brought to it. But I wanted to quickly give the board this overview. And for the out years, again, this looks out. You can see that until we get to the 2015-16 year, we don't return to normal PICO funding levels. So it is right now looking still, as we were in September, pretty grave for the university system, of course, all through K-20, with our reliance on PICO. I'd be glad to take any questions, Mr. Chair, or I can quickly go through the remainder of the LBR.
Are there any questions regarding the PICO situation? We're broke right now.
And I'll quickly then go through. This was the budget that was adopted for PICO back in September, but I'm going to skip through that. That's for informational purposes only. All those projects, other than that one line right here, this bottom line, $22 million, which is allocated by formula to all this system. All those other projects above, the funding for that's gone. So we basically, in effect, have no PICO list for 12-13. There's that $22 million with the breakout. Some of the non-PICO portions of the LBR, and I'll go through this very briefly, the universities have asked to amend some minor components of the LBR. These are projects which, if constructed, from non-PICO sources, from non-appropriated sources, may require general revenue to operate. As per statute, we, the universities, have to seek legislative approval if they wish to seek general revenue, operations, and maintenance funds in a subsequent year. And the items that are highlighted in yellow are additions to this list. And of course, in whole, these are not going to be funded from E&G sources. For example, just that first one, the Wright Student Union that exists today at UF, that is not primarily an E&G facility. UF is planning and to go forward with some significant renovations. As part of that renovation, some of the space will be eligible. It will be instructional space, and it will be eligible. To make it eligible to ask for funding, it has to be placed on this list, put before the board. So I'll just move forward unless there's any questions on the list. You can't read it. Oh, yes, I'll be glad to read the yellow items. The first is for UF, the Wright Student Union. For FSU, the Gunter Building, the Commonwealth, the 3,000 block Commonwealth Building, and the FSU Johnston Annex. For New College, their Physical Plant Shop Annex and Physical Plant Warehouse. And lastly, for UNF, the WJC-TV Building and the WJC-TV Transmitter Building. And again, the universities, these are not seeking funding. This is something they are seeking permission to move forward with these acquisitions. They may or may not happen for the facilities they don't already own. This is just an informational item for the board to, of course, approve. I probably said that incorrectly. For the board to consider, excuse me. The next item, this is, as we know, the legislature has delegated in 10-1062 authority to the Board of Governors to approve a whole variety of facilities to be funded from debt, which are typical student unions, parking, dormitories. However, athletics and certain other facilities are not specifically named in 10-1062. Therefore, if a university is considering debt financing, that does require prior legislative approval. So added to that list is now the FSU Athletic Facility, for USF, the International Student Center, USF Tennis Complex, and finally the UWF East Campus University Graduate, Veteran, and Greek Student Housing Facility. And again, these will, if approved by the legislature, these various debt projects will at some point come before this board for approval in accordance with our debt guidelines. Lastly, for the LBR, UCF has requested a reappropriation, and as you see, they're requesting that funds be transferred. These are PICO funds that have been previously appropriated from the Interdisciplinary Research and Incubator Facility, and that they could be applied to the Classroom Building 2. The Classroom Building 2 was, of course, on the board's adopted PICO list for 12-13. With the lack of PICO for 12-13, UCF would like to take, it's a figure of roughly $5.5 million, transfer it from one appropriation to the other so they can at least complete one facility. And with that, Mr. Chair, that's the amendments to the fixed capital LBR.
Okay. Could I have an amendment, a motion to amend the 2012-2013 SUS fixed capital outlay legislative budget request, please? All in favor, say aye. Opposed, no. Thank you. Next on the list, we have the higher education utilization study. Chris, would you briefly describe that to us? And
Sure, I'll be very glad to do that. The 2011 session in proviso passed language directing the Board of Governors as well as the State Board for the college system to conduct a study of higher education classroom utilization, particularly looking at utilization on nights and weekends. And what we have done, we have worked jointly with staff of the Florida college system to put together what I feel is a good high-level summary of where the state stands on utilization. Of course, this is an issue that this board has addressed before. We looked at this, of course, last year, and the report highlights some of the things we've done in the past, including last year recommending that the summer term for the University of Florida, where they have that spring-summer cohort to try to increase utilization. So this report is designed to comply with this proviso requirements, and we will get to the recommendations. This same report, once we receive feedback from the board today, and if the report is approved in draft format, this same report will be presented to the State Board of Education in order for us to comply with the January 15, 2012 deadline as been specified in the budget document. And I'll go right to the recommendations. The recommendation is in two parts, and the first is that this board and the State Board direct the two system chancellors to appoint a work group, a joint work group of appropriate college and university system personnel to establish uniform, data-based, equitable utilization standards and policies designed to encourage overall improvements to utilization, so that which of course will lead to increased graduation and retention. And it goes through several questions that could be addressed. One of the key things that we need is each university, each college has their own systems, their own internal ERP systems for, of course, managing their room schedules, their course utilization, and how they manage their space. We do not, at a system level, have that data. It's in different systems, different software. So we believe that by the universities and the colleges collaborating, they could share best practices and perhaps come up with a way to actually increase utilization without increasing costs. One, just for instance, if you offer courses in blocks, in larger blocks, say it's 1.5-hour blocks twice a week, that doesn't provide as much flexibility as, say, 3 one-hour blocks. There's pros and cons to the block hours you offer, but often it's not looked at from a systemic perspective. It needs to be looked at systemically. So that is one recommendation, and that this work group consider a host of questions. I believe there would be, all our institutions would be eager to participate in such a work group. And lastly, that each student should be required to take at least one off-peak course, getting to the heart of the matter, to have a night course or a weekend course before they graduate. So not a tremendously long report. I'd be glad to take any input from the committee.
Are there any questions about the report? Madam Chairman?
Yeah, Chris, is there really any way to monitor this whole requiring students to take off-peak course? I mean, it just seems like there's really no way to monitor whether students would actually do that or not.
I believe it would have to be monitored in the same way the universities currently, check with the summer term requirement we previously had, where, each institution would have to keep up with that just as they would with any other requirement. We would have to obviously put that into a more formal regulation and seek university input before we adopted such a regulation. This is something that work group could consider if it seemed practical. They may look at it and say, 1 or 2 courses, that doesn't really raise the threshold. Maybe it should be 3 or 4. So it's a very good question.
Well, there's a comparison in the middle of the report that shows the Florida college system, the state university system, and the K-12 system. And I guess because of the K-12 system building all the classrooms over the last few years, their utilization has gone, would I say up or down, has gone down basically. And ours has stayed pretty constant. And of course the college system, which is not unusual, is doing a little bit better utilization than we are. Am I reading that right, Chris?
Yes, sir. What we see there is that utilization for both the college system and the university system from a purely statistical perspective has remained relatively constant over the last 10 years. Class size reduction has, from a technical standpoint, reduced the rate of utilization so that each K through 12 student now per classroom has more space. And I think that's a pretty common sense explanation. When class size went in, They didn't physically reduce the size of the classroom. There's just fewer students, but that means there's more space for the existing students in the room. But so you're reading it exactly right.
All right, okay, thanks. Well, what we need to do now is we need to send this report on to the legislature. If there's not any further input from the committee, do I have a motion to approve the draft report so we can send it along?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. The last, we have a resolution by Florida State to refinance some bonds. Mr. Kinsley, would you please walk us through that? This we have to have a motion on also.
Yes, just very briefly, this is in accordance with 10-1062. The original resolution on this particular series of bonds did not provide for refinancing. Bond Financing is recommending that this series be refinanced for savings. Once approved by this board and by Governor and Cabinet, they will conduct the sale. They'll realize savings, and I'll report back to the board and this committee what this realized savings were. We have been conducting a whole series of refinancing. We're not extending terms. We're just lowering the rate, and we've been very successful with that. I'm very pleased to report. Just this particular original resolution did not have refinancing authorized by your predecessor board. So this is just correcting that omission.
And we're saving money.
We will save money certainly on this for Florida State University Research Foundation.
Right. Do I have a motion to adopt the resolution? Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Well, that's really the last item that we have to go over in this committee. I'd like to thank you, Chris, for a report well done, and I'm sorry to the board that we weren't able to read my technical expertise here. But anyway, thanks. Good job, Chris.
We'll make the print a little larger next time, sir.
Let's make it a little larger so we can read it. With that, this committee is adjourned.